In other words, you want to build, it's your response. And I learned, because whatever I did after that, I went to the board, I said, I'm not asking you for money. If we're going to build, if I'm going to build a school, which is the adjacent, that's my headache. You don't want to give, don't give. I will raise the money. So essentially, that became the pattern in the growth of development of Addis Israel. And at that time, we had the Farbant, since you raised the question what organizational structures there were at the time. There was the Farbant, and the people who were active in the Farbant were the Hopmans, Moshe Kam, Olav Shalom, and Fuss. Fuss came from Israel. After the war, he went to Israel and worked in the kibbutzim, and he spoke a little Hebrew, and he got always the Israeli papers, and so he worked for the Histadrut. That was the Histadrut campaign. The Gever Shavim campaign was also part of it, but that was the whole group, and you had another 2 or 3 people. So the Hoffmans, because Shvayim, who the Mishpachas who established Shvayim, were related to in Almogi, that's the whole Hoffman family. So therefore, the Histadrut and that whole group of the Mapainikis were all parts. So they'd come to Hamilton. That's how I got close to Almogi and that whole group. And it was a very exciting time. When I go to Israel, I'd see, I'd have the connections to the Memshalah, so to speak.
Sure.
This was the who's who in Israel. But that solved the issue. But Hamel, go ahead.
I wanted to ask a question because I don't want to take up the whole day, and it's now pouring. I understand the school comes a little bit later.
Not too much.
Not too much later, and your point that you're raising the money.
Yes.
And it's your headache.
Right.
So this was at a time when there was a Talmud Torah.
Yes.
In Hamilton. You announced that you're building a Jewish day school.
Yes.
The community embraces you.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you what happens at the time. I announced that there's a that we're going to start a day school. It's interesting. Rabbi Baskin invites me to the temple for a Sunday morning breakfast, because they had their breakfasts at that time, to speak about the day school. And Rabbi Baskin was always a gentleman on this subject, never took a stand saying don't or do. His personal feeling was negative, of course, and so was Marjorie's, negative, but not negative in the sense to oppose me as such. And a very distinguished individual gets up, I didn't know who he was, and he says, Rabbi, don't you think that we have outgrown the concept of a ghetto? And don't you think it's time that we recognize that we have to be part of the general community? Well, remember, I'm young, and I really did not have the diplomatic finesse. So I said to this gentleman, I said, listen, I think you're right. I think the question you have to ask is, do you want your children to be Jewish and marry Jewish people? That is the question. If you want your children to remain Jewish and be part of the Jewish community, then there's no alternative. Little did I know that his son that day would marry a black woman who was not Jewish. Everyone was shocked that I even took a stand like that. But I didn't know. And I'm sure if I would have known, I would never have answered the question in that way. But be that as it may, that gives you the mood of the temple. At the Beth Jacob, there was opposition. And there they took a strong opposition. And the person who comes into my life is a man by the name of Ken Sobel. And when Ken Sobel comes into my life, he takes a strong feeling for me. And I said to him, Ken, you're giving $25,000, $30,000 to the United Jewish Welfare in Hamilton. I said, that's borscht. Why don't you give me $1 million free advertisement? Israel was having a $500 million deficit. And why don't we utilize the mass media? You know, Sarnoff in the States what is it to really market $500 million? So let's experiment with this. He gets excited because now he can give $1 million worth, so to speak, of free advertisement, and we start picking up things in Israel, from Israel, and we're relatively successful until I'm asked to give up the rabbin. I said, forget it. I only give advice. Why I tell you this story is Rabbi Wiener then comes to town, who has a lot of charisma and relates well with youth because his focus was youth. Took kids to Israel. He had a sukkah party, and he got kids sleeping in the sukkah during sukkahs, you know. And he, since Ken Sobel is a member of the Beth Jacob, he sees two young boys here. He's going to be the godfather of both, and he brings us together. He comes at my home. He'd come about 3 times a week. He'd have supper in my house and with his Rolls Royce. Then I'd go out to his farm, and Sam Katz, who was my president, had lived across the street. And when he'd see Ken Sobel's Rolls Royce, he'd say, don't bother the rabbi. He's with Ken Sobel. He thought Ken Sobel was going to make Mashiach for me. Be that as it may, he was in charge of he had a provincial position as well, all CHCH TV and all that, CHML. And I said to him, I'm going to build a yeshiva. So I bought Dalebrook, that whole street. I put in $5,000 of my own. And that's where I'm going to build the yeshiva. And I needed dormitories, and he was part of the development within the province, and he'd give me money for dormitories. We were having a great time. Here I had Israel going, had my yeshiva going, and I had Ken Sobel, because that opened the doors. So when that opened the doors for me, so what happens is something very interesting. Friday, I come in to see Ken Sobel, and he's in the hospital. I say to Ken, you'll have a refuah shalem, we have a lot of things to do. You got to get well, I need you. He says, Rabbi, you came 20 years too early, but I'll give you $100,000. Okay, great. Shabbos morning, his daughter comes to the shul, and she says, my father died. So immediately, I left the shul, I went to Ken Sobel's home. And the question was, who was going to deliver the eulogy? Remember, Wiener, I don't think was, Wiener already decided. He called me Erev Yom Kippur, because we had a good relationship. Wiener calls me Erev Yom Kippur, and he says, Morty, you're the first person I'm telling that there's no room for 2 great people in Hamilton. I'm checking out. Those were his words. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. So he left.
Made Aliyah.
Pardon me?
He made Aliyah.
He made Aliyah. He went to Israel. And Ken Sobel, that was after, dies. And the question is, who would deliver the eulogy? Where would it be? I said, look, you've been to Beth Jacob all your life. You weren't members in Addis Israel. You have to ask Rabbi Silverman. And he was the one. I thought it was the appropriate thing to do. So it goes to Beth. My $100,000 went to Beth Jacob, but that's beside the point. I came and says, that money, but I never didn't pursue it to that extent, be that as it may.
But somehow you...
Then we started the day school.
But where does the yeshiva come in? The yeshiva, I would have thought, comes much later.
Yes, but that's why I had to sell it. I didn't have Dalebrook Crescent. I sold it, got no money, but I got my $5,000 back. So therefore, that was not the day school. That was the yeshiva concept. My day school starts already, but we had 4 classrooms here in the shul. Mm-hmm. Until I needed more classrooms. When I needed more classrooms, I went to the Federation. I wanted to utilize the Jewish Community Center on Delaware. So Sid Pakin, Olav Hashalom, gets up and says, over my dead body will you bring a parochial school into the Jewish Community Center. And that is Rabbi Silverman, Rabbi Baskin, Marjorie, and Gloria, all against that.
So they weren't supportive?
No, what do you mean not supportive? They wouldn't allow me to utilize the center. So that was the end of that conversation. So then I recognized I had to build. So Wiener told me that he met a fellow by the name of Stanley Sobel, and Stanley Sobel gave him money to get kids to go to Israel. So I never heard of the guy's name. Where does Stanley Sobel give him money to go to Israel with kids? He gave him scholarships. So I went to see Stanley Sobel, and I spent with Stanley Sobel like once a week till I got into the office and so on. And after about a year, I said, Stanley, I have to build. And he gave me $50,000. But with 50 was not enough, so I said, we'll have a big banquet for you. And all their names were there, so I raised about $100,000. The school building at that time was $175,000. Mr. Fuss I said, you'll build it, and you won't charge anything. And then Dave Hoffman gave me all the plumbing and heating. So together I was able to build the academy that you see. All that occurs in a very short period of time. That means it's all completed by 63, 64. So I have already the mikveh, I have the shul, we have the academy, and I have to worry about the budgets. So this is where this community existed at the time. And then I started speaking during that time in English because we were getting more people coming to shul. And my emphasis was not Friday night. My emphasis was Shabbos morning. And it was growing gradually, but I had great loyalty in the congregation. Never did I have any machlokes or anyone really giving me a hard time in any way. So I really was able to be creative because there was no negative energy that I put in here. And at that time, later on, because I think it relates to this, later on, there was a Rabbi, Stuart Rosenberg. He was the high priest of Canadian Jewry. He was the one that established the United Synagogue Day School.
This is Stuart Rosenberg?
The Stuart Rosenberg.
Right.
And the Beth Tzedek, I mean, he was a very dynamic personality who was very creative. And then one day, the board fires him. And it's an ugly situation. And of all the people in the world, he calls me. And he says, Morton? I said, who's this? He says, it's Stuart. I said, Stuart, what can I do for you? He says, I want just a desk. I'll be your assistant. So I said, Stuart, first come and see me. So he came, and I said, you know, your fall was due to the fact that you thought you were a Hasidic Rebbe. You forgot that you democratized religion, and therefore you only became a CEO. If the religious committee feels that they go with egalitarian, there's no love who says it's usser or mutter. Whatever they want. You are functioning as a CEO. And once you develop that there's no religious authority, but you have a religious committee, then what do you want? They felt that you've served the purpose, and they need another man. So there's a chapter in one of his books that he writes about this, but he doesn't mention my bed. It's unimportant. But the important thing is that became the essence of the conservative movement. And I think that's their shortcoming. There's no religious authority, and they're all, because even when you have, just a quick commentary on Rabbi Silverman, the real issue that I see, and I said it to Israel Silverman, Olav Shalom, the same thing, the real issue was, he thought he was also a Rav. Not to the same extent as an Orthodox rabbi, but be that as it may, in terms of emotional feelings, he did not see himself as a CEO. And the psak would be his. He would rule on certain things. Whatever leeway he saw, it's not important. I'm not getting involved in that issues. But that became the issue. And I was able, I don't think that if I would have been a rabbi in a larger city, where you would have balabatim who built it and you were only working for them, I don't think I would have been as creative nor as productive. So I think that Hamilton afforded me a very unusual type of situation to build this community.
You used to visit the Beth Jacob when you came to town. Did you ever go there for Shabbos?
No, I never go there for Shabbos. But with the rabbis, I had a good relationship. Right. We never had a negative. That's why Silverman had no problem here. Nor Simon. Simon invited me to his home Saturday night. But shuls, I didn't go. Right. Not religious, I should say that. Right. I would go there for any service, whether Khalila funeral or a communal service, but not a religious service.
I was actually going to end by asking only half facetiously whether the Addis, when you came, had the best Kiddush, the best Shalosh Shudas, or did it not stack up to the other shuls? It's so important for me to know that.
Not only was it important, and you say this with a blissful smile on your face, but I want you to know that there is major significance to what you say. And what I mean is as follows. When I look at my families, let's say the Waxmans who played later on, I brought them back into the shul, brought them back into the fold, and they contributed. What motivated them? Why did they feel so close to the shul? And I've given this a lot of thought. They could have been all my members would have been very comfortable with Beth Jacob. But it lacked the warmth and the schmaltzering. It was not their home. And since the shul is not their home, therefore they have to now, they're spectators. And if I go to a show, I want to be entertained. If the entertainer is no good, or the religious service doesn't affect me, but when I'm at home, I'm not an observer. I'm home. I feel good. As Alachaim, just to give you an example, there was a man by the name of Chil Mandel. He knew a little how to learn. This is how it started. Shabbos right after. He would go in before me and make Kiddush, take a glass, of whiskey, down a glass of whiskey, and then wait. No one was allowed to make Kiddush. When I would come in, he'd go outside, Kiddush. And that's when we'd make Kiddush. But it's amazing. But that is how it started. And then they'd have and no one would leave until that bottle was finished. That was every morning. And Moshe Aaron would say, this is air conditioning in the Zimmer, in Sevarmt in the winter. In the winter it warms and it cools in the summer. And I understood this. And I used to kibitz with him. He says, you need to drink a whole glass? I have more efficient body than you. And this was the sense of humor that we had. Yeah. And the warmth, that was very shalashidas or shalashidas. If there was no beer and schmaltzering, was no shalashidas.
Sure. You're wasting your time.
I'm wasting time.
You're wonderful, Rabbi Green.
Okay.
Thank you for your help. We both thank you. And should it be the case that we have forgotten something, as a fully paid up member of this shul, I will feel that I could come and ask you for another few minutes.
Make one comment. No one is a full paid up member here.
Oh wait, you don't remember that I was on the board with.
That's right. I say full. Let me tell you what I mean.
Please
just have to understand. You never pay full. Whatever you pay, we say thank you. And I'll tell you that's a very important principle. Whenever a person would come into the shul, I had one case that you should see. I get a call. They're members of the Beth Jacob. He calls me up. How much you charge for a seat for Rosh Hashanah? Nothing. What's maintenance? Nothing. What do you? Nothing. How many seats you need? 6. Fine. Nothing. I send him 6 seats. Right? He comes to shul with his family. 6 seats. How much is? Nothing. Nothing is nothing. He sends in $3,600. I don't know the man from Adam. I say to him, $3,600. Wonderful. I have a dinner that year. That was the 25th. We go to this man. I said, I'm not calling him. I don't know. I said nothing, so I can't go to him, right? They go to him. They come back. He gave 36. I said, what, 3,600? 360? What is it? I call him up to thank him. Thank you. He says, thank you. I gave 18. My son gave 18. We got 36. 36,000. Amazing. And then when I went in, when I built the yeshiva, I said to this person, I think you're in a business, you know, you should, the kitchen. He says, what's their kitchen? I said, you don't want the base medrash. The base medrash is 250,000. You tell me that I can't do that? What I want to say is, I never approached anybody and said, this is what I want you to do. And even till today, I said, the dues has to be open. This is not going to be a business. And you'll get more in that way. And therefore, a person can't afford it. Who took all the Russians when they came?